So here he is, Andrew Payne, calling me from, where do you live, Andrew? I feel like I should know this.
That's okay. Bearwood in Birmingham. So
Oh,
Bearwood's between Harborne, the particularly leafy part of Birmingham, and West Bromwich. Sort of we're a happy medium between the two.
oh, cool. No, I didn't know that. Obviously, I haven't asked you that question. So, Andrew, thank you very much for joining me today. So we are, well, what is it? The 22nd of June. So I don't know, we're what, 10 or 12 weeks, is it, since lockdown?
You lose track of it in the end, don't you?
I don't know. But anyway, what we do know is that although we are coming out of lockdown, and this series of interviews was done primarily to help people to be more aware of what might be happening to people that they know in terms of domestic abuse during lockdown. Of course, this isn't just going to go away just because we're coming out of it. So I'm very grateful for you coming on, and you are the first man that I've interviewed. And just to say that what we know is that 1 in 3 women in their lifetime and 1 in 6 men in their lifetime will suffer some form of domestic abuse. So it's really very appropriate that we do actually highlight with a guy who has actually experienced this himself. So, I'm very grateful, and I know that, you have quite a tale to tell. So, so first of all, could you just give us a little bit of the background of, when this started for you? I think, were you at university or was it after that?
I just graduated from uni and I'd moved to London and I met my now ex-wife. So you're going back to 1999. We were married quite quickly from until 2008. So you're talking roughly a 10-year period of time. And I mean, people will sort of say, well, obviously, if you were a reasonably intelligent kind of a person, presumably you were duped. Presumably she started out lovely, you fell in love, it was amazing, and then it just suddenly turned. That's how they do, And a good friend of mine, she's a female, and her abusive ex-husband, he literally turned the day after they got married. So people assume that's kind of what happens. How else would you be so stupid to fall into this situation? But actually, in my situation, I think it's very common. I fell into it with my eyes open. I was brought up to be a good boy. I was a nice guy, but I didn't have a clear sense of boundaries, and I was a bit of a people pleaser, and I loved helping people. And so when I met her, she was just there's a lot of buzz and energy about her, and we started dating, and kind of the madness was gradually introduced, and the chaos. But it was introduced early. Definitely the first time, probably within 2 or 3 months, there was some crazy stuff happening. And obviously, as a mature man in 45, I would now be like red flag, probably walk away. But at sort of 22, 23, quite naive, I just wanted to help her and make her better in some way. So for me, the way I fell into abuse wasn't a con. It wasn't some deceitful trick over time. She was at the end as she was at the start. She never changed, in that sense. So it was always a tough relationship, really, really tough.
I think the last interview I did was very similar, actually. A young lady called Laura, and she was 18, 19, I think, at university. And that's interesting because she was the same as well. She knew within the first 2 weeks. And there were red flags, but she kind of went, oh, well, I probably shouldn't be here. But she, like you, she was a good girl. She was desperate to have a boyfriend. There are all sorts of reasons why, a person might enter into a relationship like this, but never imagining that it was going to end up in the way that it did for you.
No. Absolutely. And it got worse, quite early on. There were like suicide attempts. There was then a lot of violence towards me. And the stress early on was horrible. And I used to go to work, and I'd have cuts on my face or whatever, where she'd either grabbed the face on the nails or punched or kicked. A lot of biting going on early on, things being thrown at me. Sometimes they landed, sometimes. So things like keys, a set of keys, if they come at you at full pace and hit your body, they're going to hurt. They're going to draw blood if they hit in a certain way. But I always sort of said, oh, it's a shaving incident. If people say, hey, what's up with your face? And I used to feel that, surely one day there's so many shaving incidents, someone is going to say, mate, do you need some help with your shaving here? You need some coaching or something. It seems to be happening a lot. But also my sick leave. I mean, I'm quite a conscientious person, but the impact of the abuse really hit me at work. I became a rubbish employee. I mean, I was lying the whole time about sick leave and taking this time out and that time out. And that really was inside I felt wrong about doing it. But when you're in an abusive situation, you just will do anything to keep the peace. You'll do anything to please your abuser. And then you just get used to making excuses for them. Oh, well, she's had a really tough life. She's doing her best. It was probably my fault because I was being really annoying or whatever. And so you become their greatest defenders, their greatest excuse maker. And that's then, once that pattern has emerged, it's then very difficult because your confidence is constantly decreasing as you just lose yourself. So
you went from being an ideal employee to being one that actually was really struggling. And presumably what you mean is you were having time off work to support her, but you weren't having time off for you were having time off for her.
Time off for her, to manage her, support her, particularly when she had our first child. She needed so much support because she was struggling, and there were suicide attempts, and but also the rows till like 3 o'clock, 4. I would try and go to bed and just let's try and get to bed peacefully. She'd been really upset about something or other, but she would always come into the bedroom or where sort of midnight, half, and really start everything, either start attacking me or shouting, screaming. So when you're in a high pressure job in London and you're not actually getting to bed most nights till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, you've got to be up at 7 for the commute. I mean, I was once caught on the phone, falling asleep at work on the phone to a client by my boss. I literally had sat in my chair and fell asleep I was on the phone, and my boss woke me up with the client wondering what was going on the other end of the phone. And so it had a big impact. And I think in the end, I made this decision that I would have to try and create my own business in some way, because at least then I could manage my hours. It wasn't compatible to be married to my ex-wife and to be beholden to someone else in some way, like an employer. And so that was actually the catalyst for me starting my recruitment business that was relatively successful for a while in the boom economic times of sort of the early 2000s. So it's a strange reason for setting up a business. I'm not sure there's many people that set up a business for that reason alone, but that was my primary driver to setting the business up.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? And you mentioned that your colleagues would ask you about injuries, but presumably 1999, and this is why we're doing this campaign, is that there might be guys and ladies who would never dream that domestic abuse happens to men.
Yeah,
I think to ask.
Yeah, I honestly feel the recruitment firm that I was with for the majority of that time before I set up my business, they were good people. They were really decent people, and I honestly think had I shared it with them, they would have taken me seriously. They would have believed me. They would have supported me. But back then, there wasn't that awareness that they might pose that question. And I guess looking back now, I think probably. Had I been challenged in that, and they said, listen, are you sure that, whatever, I reckon I would have opened up actually, but I probably needed them to ask that question.
How did you feel at the time, Andrew? You were obviously stressed. Were you frightened? Can you describe kind of the emotions that you were going through? Was it just a kind of day-to-day existence or minute to minute,
I think, I can, for myself, I broke my wife's favourite wine glass.
Hang on a minute. That didn't record. I'm just going to ask you that question again. So during that time, Andrew, how can you describe to us kind of how you felt on a day-to-day basis? Obviously you were stressed, but what were the emotions that you were feeling?
Definitely long-term fear. You are always on edge. I became an obsessive planner. So each day you're thinking ahead, what are the things that might pull her triggers? and how do I offset these things from happening? You know, every situation is potentially hugely stressful, whether we're going to visit her parents or whether we've got my parents coming to visit. You're constantly on edge and thinking about how you can make sure that everything's perfect so it doesn't suddenly kick off. Because if it kicks off, it could, and who knows what could happen. And then that's the thing.
Did it ever kick off in front of your parents or her parents?
Yes, yes. Not physical violence, but extraordinary outbursts. Her parents were used to that. They'd seen that all her life. Obviously, my parents were shocked, and you know, it was humiliating for me. I used to always try and sort of cover it up and massage it over, and she's doing her best, and you know, again, like I say, make excuses for her. Her own parents were used to it. They used to be quite scathing about her, and in fact, until the marriage broke up, they were very supportive of me, and you know, they recognised there were issues with their daughter. But I think all I can describe, and you know, my daughters have since described it, because they obviously, after the marriage broke up, they lived with her for a while, that you just, even when times are good, you're always on edge, just in case. You're always trying your best to say exactly what you think she'll want to say. You're trying to do things that you know will please her, which is okay. But when it becomes in a healthy relationship, of course, you're going to try and please your partner to some degree. But it was at obsessive levels, and you become manipulative because you're constantly trying to move things out the way that might antagonize your ex-wife. So a couple of really silly examples. I once broke my ex-wife's favorite wine glass. I think I was washing up or something. I actually ended up hiding it in the neighbor's bin. And then years later, when she said, "Oh, have you seen my wine glass anywhere?" I was like, "No, I don't know. It's strange." Yeah. And then I breathed a sigh of relief when the bin lorry came and took the neighbour's bin and whatever. I mean, that's just so stupid, you know, but that is what you'll do. Or when we were selling our house in France, she took a particular disliking to the estate agent, this female estate agent, who was absolutely fine. I don't know why my ex took a disliking, but my ex made all these allegations and she wanted me to write this letter of complaint to the estate agent. So I just did. I just wrote this letter. It was absolute twaddle. It was all lies, but you know, I just did that because you wanted me to do that. So you just do whatever. And so you compromise your own integrity again and again and again. And that in itself lowers your confidence.
Yeah. And your self-worth as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so then, you know, that's where it becomes harder to take initiative, to come up with your own ideas, to think, actually, I need to leave this. You know, I need to leave. How do I plan my exit? You're not going to be thinking that when you're in survival mode, just day-to-day living, where your own confidence is already shattered, where you think you deserve the abuse anyway, where the pattern is you just make mistakes for your abuser. You're not going to leave that, particularly then when you add in children to the mix and the complications with leaving, which is why people get stuck, men and women.
Yeah, it's a very good point, because a lot of people really who've never been in a situation say, why did you go back? Because on average, you know, women or men go back into the relationship numerous times. You know, it takes 17 incidents or something for a woman, I don't know the figures for a man, to have been physically or sexually abused before they report it. You know, and from looking from the outside in, it's very difficult, I think, to understand the dynamics of that, which is one of the reasons that we're doing this campaign. But you mentioned there that you were in France, and I think, you know, that had quite a lot to do with kind of what was happening to you as well, because you were almost kind of isolated. It was your wife that wanted to go and move to France, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, she said, I started this recruitment firm in London. It was just me, but it was the money was coming in, and she basically said, well, I'm off with our eldest daughter. You can come or stay, but I'm going, so see you later. So I went to and made the business work. I ran the business from a garden shed in the south of France. It worked pretty well. Taxation was complicated, but I was quite isolated there in the south of France. I don't think my ex moved us there purely in order to isolate me. I think that was perhaps an added bonus. She'd always wanted to live in the south of France, to be fair. And she's one of these people where, you know, wherever she is never good enough. Yeah. And she's satisfied with the life she has. So she is always on the move. And I think often you people that are quite narcissistic, they're never going to be satisfied with their life. There has to be this next buzz always. And so for her, it was the south. Everything will be all right when we go to the south of France. And of course, it was for a few months, and then it just was the same.
Yeah. And so by the time you'd had your second daughter, so that was, you were in the south of France, and actually it was there that this all came to a head, and the moment at which, you know, somebody questioned this, which was a neighbour, I believe.
Yeah, you know, that was although I didn't leave the relationship at that point, it was 2006 in the summer. I always remember a really hot day in the south of France, and as I explained in my my TEDx talk, one of the things she used to put, and I think abusers do this. This isn't just a woman on man thing. This is, you know, both abusive people do this. They'll put their victim in lose-lose situations where whatever that person does, it's going to end badly. And so she asked me to put some shelves up in the sitting room, and I am rubbish at DIY. I mean, I've got a little better now, to be fair, because so my wife is a wonderful woman. You know, if I cock up a DIY job, she's like, oh, never mind. You know, her dad's a genius at that stuff anyway, and we know we can put it right. So I haven't got the same fear, and so I have tried. I'm never going to be great at it, but I'm a lot better than I was. But anyway, we're in the south of France, and you know, for me, in putting these shelves up, I either ask someone else to do it and say, look, we got loads of cash, we'll just delegate that out. But then I'll be accused of not trying to better myself, and isn't it such a shame? And then that kind of discussion is only heading one way, which is her rage and a violent outburst, possibly, and shouting and screaming. And obviously we've got 2 young children, so that's not a great option, suggesting we delegate. Or I try the shelves myself, but if it goes wrong, it will kick off. And so those are, you know, so my wife suggesting me to put up the shelves is a hugely stressful moment in my life. And that's the thing with people in abusive situations, just the everyday stuff becomes so stressful. And so I'd attempted to put these shelves up, and of course it had gone wrong. It was a hot day, and she started shouting and screaming, and I'm saying, oh, you know, because I've messed it up, and I can do a better job. You know, it's fine. I'll sort it out. All this, and she stabbed me in the arm with this pencil. She just grabbed this sharp pencil, she's stabbing me in the arm. But our front door used to be unlocked. A lot of the front doors did, and neighbours would come in and out. It's rural south of France. We're in a little medieval town. And so our English neighbour had heard the shouting and screaming. She was a bit of a drinking buddy of my wife. She knew that she had issues and we had issues. So she burst through the front door as my wife's stabbing my arm. And she persuaded my wife to go next door with her and calm down. But it was then later that evening, she said, Andrew, do you realise this is domestic abuse? You do realise? And I remember thinking, what? Like, it just never ever dawned on me. And so it definitely started a train of thought that actually this is really, really not great at all. It coincided at that time, my daughters were then sort of 2 and sort of 5, and were getting older, and it's like this is not great. But it still took another sort of year and a half to be ready to walk away and make that break from the relationship. But that certainly started, that wake-up call, that challenge certainly started a catalyst. Yeah.
And you know, you weren't seeing your parents very much at this point because you were in France. I know it wasn't deliberate, but by definition, you know, your parents weren't really seeing what was going on a regular basis.
At that time, they were only coming out once a year, and she used to create so much. It was so stressful in the run-up and in the rows afterwards that they were coming out for 2 days a year, and that was it. And they didn't stay long. And
that's heartbreaking, because they weren't seeing their granddaughters, they weren't seeing you.
They absolutely agonized about it. And, you know, at one point in France, and this is the way that it's kind of gaslighting works, where abusers really get into their victim's mind and make them think things that aren't true, and mess with what they believe is true and false. I actually cut off contact completely with my parents for about 4 or 5 months. I remember ringing them to tell them. I had such a heavy heart, but she sort of convinced me that my family, we're a close family, you know, wanted me to remain as a little boy. And in order to really kind of man up and be the man, I needed to cut contact with them for a while, which obviously is just madness. I mean, my parents are not interfering, but at that time, in that, you know, you look back now and think, what was I even thinking? But I remember ringing them, and it was it's just a horrible moment telling them that. And some contact after 4 or 5 months started again, sort of tentatively. But yeah, there's definitely there was definitely a move to just try and really reduce any time that they had in our life at all.
And have you talked to them about it subsequently? You know, now that you've left and you obviously you're very happy now and you've got a new family. Do you talk to your mum and dad? Do you ever talk about that time and how they feel about that?
Yeah, no, and obviously, without wanting to plug my TEDx talk, they were there at the event.
Oh, cool. We will plug your TEDx talk, by the way.
But they were there at the event, and we've talked about it, and they were instrumental to helping me pick up the pieces again. They've been amazing. And so when the relationship did break down completely, and I came back from France, and then I lived in England, but I was going back to France each month to see the girls. But then I knew they'd probably follow, and come back to England. It was a bit of a gamble, and it paid off because they did. And so my parents were hugely instrumental in helping me kind of piece my life together again. And, I often think, so some of the people, so I do bits of charity work, and we work with people that have been homeless, struggling with substance abuse. And the difference between me and these people we help are usually that I just had an amazingly strong family to fall back on in my darkest hour. And not everyone has that. And if you take my family out of the equation, maybe I'd end up as an alcoholic on the streets. There's the only difference between me and someone else is really strong family in that time when you need them.
Yeah. And so, you came out of that, and then the girls, and then you had a custody battle, basically, didn't you? Which you didn't think you were going to win.
Oh, well, and I think one of the things, men generally, and I know it's hard for women to secure convictions as well. And I know that a lot is changing in the family courts as well. And we need to protect children from having loving parents squeezed out of their lives. But we also need to protect children so that they're not forced into contact with abusive parents in the name of stopping parental alienation. We need a really intelligent approach. But men often won't try and secure a conviction because as you're coming out of the relationship, you're just in a program of appeasement. You just want to diffuse all tension and not add fuel to the flames. Of course, you're not going to secure a conviction. So in the absence of a conviction, in the absence of having reported what was going on to the police, I decided, well, look, if she has the children, that's probably better than me trying to go for the children and lose, because the impact of that then on future contact could be awful. So I was deliberately giving her more maintenance than I was legally obliged to do. And I really did dance around her and just accept whatever term she said, as long as I had contact. And it kind of worked. She behaved pretty well. I had fairly regular contact. I never saw them at Christmas, which was hard, but I kind of processed it that, I still had fortnightly contact. So as long as I have that, I'm not going to mess with it too much, as heartbreaking as it is to not see them at Christmas. But then I met my wife, and my business collapsed in the recession. So my maintenance went down. I just didn't have the money to give her. I warned her it was going to go down incrementally, that there's, and I would try and find a new job, but obviously, that thing together, the reduction of maintenance and then my wife coming onto the scene just caused chaos with the contact. And eventually my ex-wife totally blocked contact with my daughters. And rather than going for contact to be reinstated, I went for custody, because by that point, my eldest daughter was desperate to move, trying to get her to go back to her mum's on a Sunday evening. I'd be having to coax her out from under the bed, sobbing in a heap. Her mum had physically attacked her the year before. And after that attack, a lot changed. My eldest had always been okay about living with her mum. It was up and down. But after that attack, it was, and when my ex does become very violent, you just don't know what's going to happen. It is just crazy. It's hard to explain and really put that across. And so I thought, well, do you know what? I'll go for custody. I don't think I'll win it, but at least I can look my daughter in the eye and say, well, we tried.
Yeah.
So I fully expected to lose, and we secured custody. And we had a CAFCAS officer. I mean, I would say this because she was very supportive of me, but she spent a lot more time on the case than CAFCAS officers generally spend on cases. And just even my own lawyer said, I've never seen anything written by a Kafkas officer that is so detailed, so balanced, and so well written and put together. You just don't get this from Kafkas. So we were very lucky, and they were moved. And it was a really stressful battle. And you'd have thought, well, the girls were moved, happy story, at last. But, and the thing with abusive people, they never give up. It doesn't change. It's just the abuse constantly evolves. And so the contact that my ex-wife did have with my daughters after they moved to me, she was hugely manipulative. And there's just a new battle that forms. And I think that's the thing for people leaving abuse. And another realization is that the abuse will never go away, and it will never stop, and probably will never go, even when your kids are growing up, if they've still got contact with that abusive person will never, ever stop manipulating. So you have to try and find a way as a victim of abuse to kind of repair yourself and then understand how you're going to respond, because you can't stop it.
Sorry.
You're cool.
Like the dogs. Just a minute, I need to remove this animal. This is a guest.
Oh, he is cute. Don't show. I keep my kids out of the room, otherwise I'll be under a lot of pressure.
This is my dog's son. He's here for a while. Come on.
Bless him.
He's a nightmare. Come on. My own dog is very well behaved, but he's a bit of an idiot, and he'll bark any minute. So, sorry.
No.
I said to my husband, please keep the dogs away, and he's ignored me.
No, it's not a problem at all.
Right. So, I want to get back into a little segue about that. So, you said something like, once you've been a victim of abuse,
never goes away. Yeah.
Let's just start again, because we talked over each other. So just wait for me to stop.
Yeah, so once you've been the victim of abuse, the abuser won't change. The abuse simply evolves. It evolves as the relationship breaks up. It then evolves in those early years, and then it will probably evolve again, but it never, ever stops. And so for me, the thing I would say to people coming out of abuse is obviously do it. The grass really is greener on the other side of the hill. It takes a while to get there, but even when you're on that green grass, using that analogy, you still have to understand how you're going to respond to that abuse. The abuse won't stop. It will become more distant. It will become less frequent as your kids get older. But if you've got kids with your abuser, it will never stop.
Interesting. And how old are the girls now?
They're 18 and 15.
Okay, so they're getting less and less contact with you involved, presumably.
Yeah. So they do still see their mum. My 15-year-old has phone contact, but doesn't see her because she's beginning to think now that she will start seeing her, because when she was about 12, she stopped. She didn't want to see her mum anymore. It was too stressful and she was feeling too afraid. When she was with her mum's behaviour was too erratic, which prompted another long battle in the family courts, as my ex tried to get the decision reversed. And she wanted the girls forced into contact with her, whether they liked it or not, at 15 or 12. And we were saying, well, you can't force a 12-year-old to do something. It's not the same as if it's a 5-year-old. But the question was my 12-year-old not wanting to see mum because of me and things that I was saying? And one of my things with parental alienation is, I think there's 3 types of alienating parent. And I think you've got naive parents who do alienate, but they just don't know any better. And actually you could coach them over time and they'll be able to improve and pull their socks up. You've got deliberate alienators who are so consumed by bitterness, all they want is for their children to be as bitter as they are. You won't ever change them, regardless of what Kafkas parenting programs they've been on. It'd be a waste of time. But you've also got this third set, which sometimes causes people to fall out with me when I say this, because depending on where they stand on the issue. But for me, there's the parent that's set up to fail, whereby you want to parent neutrally, that you understand that's important for the children, and you're a decent parent, you want to do that anyway, and regardless of what's gone before. But the behavior of the other parent makes neutral parenting very, 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 very difficult to do as your children get older and they're asking direct questions about the erratic parent's behavior. And the thing is, Kafka will say, you need to skip the questions, dodge it. They give you answers that make you sound like a politician, which is fine with 5 and 6 year old children. But as your children get older, the politician style answers, they don't cut it anymore. So how do you approach some of these situations whilst parenting completely neutrally? It's not easy. It's not easy.
That was really said from the heart, Andrew, and I can completely understand, the dilemma that you've had. Being at the opposite end of, how your wife has been. And she sounds, has she ever got any help? Has she ever sought any help for her, obviously, severe kind of problems that she has?
We tried to unravel as much as we could at court. And it was interesting to see what she put in her own bundles, because sometimes she'll play on the mental health issues when it's convenient for her to do so, and she'll over-egg the pudding as such, and then other times she'll downplay it depending on what kind of character she wants to portray. Certainly before we broke up, I feel now looking back, there were signs of Munchausen's. She would say she's had miscarriages in the double figures. I'm only aware of one when we were married. Obviously that's a tragic thing, but there were all kinds of accusations of her being raped at 12 and abuse that she suffered, which I actually don't believe those anymore, knowing what I know. She had a brain tumor the size of an orange when we were married. She had bronchitis. She staged several heart attacks, which now I realise was just a nonsense. And so I think she is a fantasist. There is Munchausen's there. There are anger issues, probably personality disorder. I don't think she ever really had a correct diagnosis because her own family are very middle class and probably haven't really got their fingers on that in the way that some parents might have tried to do so. I mean, it's difficult, isn't it, with you?
Yeah, really difficult. Just to explain that Munchausen's is when they're imaginary illnesses and diseases, and they're so convincing that they, have numerous hospital attendances because they're so convinced and they're so good at covering up and convincing people.
About symptoms, they really do sound like they know what they're talking about. You really think, blimey, this person could be a GP. They really know the long words and the jargon. So I don't really know that it's clear she's been involved in some counselling, some mental health programs, but really, I honestly don't know what diagnosis she's had and what she hasn't.
But from your perspective, so thinking about, the Spot the Signs campaign, what would it have taken? So you've already said that when you were working in London for the recruitment firm, that if somebody had actually challenged you, you probably would have said, actually, yeah, I need some help. How can we help other people that might see just small signs like you perhaps had? So this lovely Andrew, who had lots of friends at university and then all of a sudden wasn't seeing anybody. So Andrew, who was coming to work with scars, and Andrew, who was very competent, and then all of a sudden 2 years later wasn't. How can we help people that may be watching this to approach somebody like you, who, if they've got a fear, even if it's unfounded, how can we help them to help that person to be able to just say, actually, yes, I do need some help?
Yeah. So I do think we're getting a lot better. I mean, I'll give some specifics in a minute. I think broadly speaking, I do think in leadership circles that there's a real sense of becoming more people-centered. So the recruitment firm that I was in before I set my own business, they were the leaders were quite relational, and so that's why I think if they'd have asked me, I would have opened up to them. And I think it's so important for business leaders to really know their team and to have their team at a place where their team could genuinely open up. Do I behave towards my team in a way that if they're in trouble, they could open up to me as a leader? And if not, how am I going to change my behavior? what are the small things I can do to build up that trust so they could confide in me? Because really, if you're a good business leader, your team should be able to confide in you. They should be able to. If they're not, there's something missing from the way that you're leading.
And it's not about just leaving it to the HR department, is it?
No, no. And in fact, because often the HR people are a bit more remote. It's the people that are working with you every day, you know, that. So I think that's important, to have that relationship in place to begin with. But I think sudden change, well, not even sudden, but if someone is suddenly becoming very withdrawn, they're not taking part socially in some of the stuff that they were. It might not just be because they're a bit of a killjoy. It might not be just because they're a wet lettuce. They can't get their kitchen pass. There might be some issues there. You're right. You know, you used to come to all these social things. You don't now. Is everything all right at home? And maybe go that step further to say at home, hint, hint. Sometimes even, you know, so if someone is, that was a close member of your family and suddenly you very rarely see them, they seem to be isolated, then with family, I would ask, you know, are you in a domestic abusive situation? You know, I see all this stuff about it on the news. These are some of the signs, triggers I can't help but notice, and risk that angry response. Of course, someone in abuse is going to be defensive. They're going to defend their partner, but you may be doing them a favor by actually making that first challenge like that neighbor did to me. Obviously, injuries is a really easy one. But like I say, I think if someone's increasingly isolated, if someone suddenly has stopped, if you knew someone was good at, I don't know. So one of the things, I certainly stepped back from some of my skills. I was a decent trumpet player. I suddenly stopped playing because she convinced me that I was quite arrogant about it, although I don't think I was. And so I do think abusers try and detach you from your skills, your social circles, so that you're isolated. The things that would give you value and esteem, that's the last thing the abuser wants to still be in your life. So yeah, I think withdrawn. I think someone who's just constantly visibly stressed, and someone certainly at work, if there's a lot of sickness absence coming in, they were once trustworthy, but they're not now. Then it might be that they're embezzling the funds of your business, but it be something entirely different. And it's trying to have that open conversation and maybe having that direct challenge, because we know how common it is. And since doing my TEDx talk, the amount of women who've approached me to say, listen, you know, it happened to my son, it happened to my brother, it was happening to my partner in the previous way. He never reported it. It really affected him at the time. And so this is hugely common. And I think we should be very intentional. We hear a lot about, are you in an abusive situation at home? We shouldn't be afraid to ask that question for fear of annoying someone.
Absolutely. Well, brilliant. I think, you know, it's not every man would be brave enough to really come on. And I know that you don't think you're brave, but, you know, not everybody would be open enough to come on here, but also to do your amazing TED Talk. And I will put the link into the show notes for this on the podcast and into the video as well, so that people can go and watch your TEDx talk as well. So thank you so much, Andrew, for sharing. And I know that, you know, nowadays you have a little boy now, don't you?
I've got 3 under 7. They keep us busy.
Yeah. So you have 5 children now. Gosh, yes, I've forgotten you've got 3 little boys. Yeah, wow.
Very full house. But no, we're doing all right. It's our kids generally get on, and we've got a garden. So, you know, we're doing our life. We're very blessed, even in lockdown. You know, we're very blessed.
Yeah. And I know that we none of us want to suffer trauma or unhappiness, but sometimes, you know, those experiences we can turn out into the good and help other people. And I know that, you know, you've definitely have done that and are doing that as well. So thank you very much.
Bless you. Thank you. Thanks for your time.